this is the 5th lesson in the Year 8 Game Design unit, and it's all about planning and designing your own computer game. So far we have had some skills lessons. You have learned how to program gravity, how to program a shooter, how to kill baddies and get scores, and how to progress onto levels. Now each of those games that you produced, I suppose in each of those lessons, they were sort of one-off practice games where you were trying out the skills. But now it's time to think, how can we utilize all of those skills to create our own computer game? And once we've had an idea, we're going to start designing it. Now, in terms of designing a computer game, if you look at these two examples here, there is a striking difference between Design 1 and Design 2. And what hopefully you would notice is that the detail is very, very different. In the first example, there are some rough sketches, but it's difficult to know exactly what's happening in the game, how we're going from scene to scene, what the different sprites are, and what is actually in the backgrounds. Whereas on example 2, you can see there's a lot more detail in the design work. They've sort of shaded areas. It's quite clear what those designs are actually showing. And also what's really important is that there's a lot of annotation. There's detail in terms of the descriptions, of the labeling of what's going on in each of those scenes. So detail is really, really important if we want to produce high quality designs. We should always be thinking, can our design be given to someone else, and will they know exactly what the game should look like, what it should be like if it was to be programmed. So what I want us to do is I want us to understand how to plan and design our own computer game, and also understand what makes a successful game within this particular Year 8 project. I want us to, at the end of the lesson, be able to decide on the objectives and themes for the game, and to design each level, the characters, and any scoring items that there are. Now, annotation, I've used that word already. It's just labeling the features of your design. Success criteria, well, that's basically what your game needs to have for it to be successful. And when I say objectives, we're talking about the aims or the purpose of the game, or a particular level, for example. So as I've said earlier, you've had several skills-based lessons so far. You've learned how to program movement and gravity, how to program a shooter, how to program scoring and baddies, and also how to program levels, so we have progression in our game. So now it's time to design our game. We've got the skills, we now need to design our very own game that's unique to us. Now, for it to be successful, the game has got to have the following. It's got to have movement and gravity. So we need to be able to move a character around, and it needs to fall to the ground if we aren't touching any of the movement keys. So therefore it's going to be a platform game. It can only jump when touching a platform as well, perhaps. It might have automatic movement, or this might be baddies that we've programmed to move from place to place. Now, when it comes to baddies, we need to have things to avoid in our platform game. So a baddie could be a person, or it could be some object that we need to avoid. And it might be that if we touch one of these baddies, that we move back to the start, or that our score goes down. But it's up to you. You can design whatever game you want. Shooting, it's got to have a shooter. Okay, so the main character's got to have a shooter programmed. It needs to be able to shoot baddies or objects. And we need to be able to have a scoring system so that if we hit those particular baddies, that our score goes up by 1 or 2 or whatever you want. And it needs to have at least 2 levels. Okay, so we need to have progression from one level to the next. Now, in terms of how we actually design it, you're going to have a design cover sheet that you can fill out. And this is really just to get down on paper so that you're really clear about, before you start coding your game, what the aims and objectives of the game are. I want you to write down what the theme of the game is as well. Is it going to be an underwater game? Is it going to be in space? Is it going to be in the Wild West? And then what I want you to do is I want you to think about those different game elements that you've already been taught. For example, movement and gravity, scoring. And I want you to think about what parts of the game are going to have movement, what parts of the game are going to have scoring, what's the shooter going to do, what levels are you going to have. And I want you to try and think about the coding that you've done in the past, and in the box next to where you've talked about, for example, movement, just jot down how you're actually going to code movement. Okay, so maybe you could look back at an example game that you made over the last few weeks and just remind yourself, and you can write down a few of those little blocks, the logic of those blocks, of those scripts, so that you can program movement. Because it's really important that when you're designing, you get to grips with, you know, what needs to happen when you're building your game, instead of just hoping that you'll remember halfway through the building. And then what I want you to do is I want you to sketch out your levels. Okay, so at least 2. Sketch them out and annotate them. So label your levels, make it really clear what the sprites are, what your scoring system is going to do, how sprites interact with each other. Make it very, very clear indeed. Now, to sort of give you an example of how you might sketch out your levels, I've done a very quick little video. Have a little watch. Hopefully it will make you fully understand what is expected in this task. Okay, so you've had a look at that quick video. Now, I'm not an artist. There were lots of flaws really in what I've done. I didn't color things in. I probably could have taken a lot more time over my sketches, but hopefully you've got an understanding as to how you might go about designing or sketching out the different levels. Now, in terms of how the design work will be assessed, you know, you want to get your gold standard. So we need to make sure that your aims and objectives are really clear and that you've got high levels of detail, that coding for different game elements are clearly explained, that perhaps you have example code that you've used in previous programs that you can sort of jot down, so that it's really helpful when you start to code and build your game, that you've got all the logic there in front of you. Your sketches, they need to be clear and well drawn. They need to be annotated with high levels of detail. Designs clearly demonstrate progression in player challenge as well. So how does the second level, how is it harder than the first? Make that really clear. Okay, good luck.